Welcome, everyone. We apologize for the delay. This is Digital Democracy on Tap. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo. COVID-19 has utterly transformed our daily lives, and one thing that has sent many people into doubt over is the future of our food supply chain. We are operating from an attitude of when in doubt, prepare for the worst tonight. So we're talking about COVID-19 victory gardens. Send us your questions or comments, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. Joining our panel tonight is Brian Mann of Victory Gardens in Mays, Rebecca McMahon from the K-State Research Extension Office, and Paul White of P&P Seed Company. Welcome, everyone. Brian, I'd like to start with you. If you would tell us how Victory Gardens of World War I and World War II inspired what you're doing now.
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah Jane. It's really nice to be here tonight. I want to say hello to everybody. I'll tell you, we've been in business for about 10 years now, and we gave Victory Gardens a lot of thought before we jumped in. And we knew that we wanted a name that went along with our philosophy. And we were very, very interested in doing things old school. And we were very interested in educating as much as we could about our products and getting people to, if not grow their own products, buy ours. And so we really encourage people to grow their own vegetables, to have, raised bed gardens or to have container gardens. And so we thought that with the concepts of, what we consider to be important ideas like growing your own food, knowing where your food comes from, knowing how your food was grown, and then the idea of community as well, families growing food together, neighborhoods growing food together. And we said, gee, that's the old-fashioned Victory Gardens concept from World War I and II. And, I think you could argue that a lot of the old-time Victory Gardens were pretty sustainable in their nature as well. And so that pretty much encompassed or embodied our own philosophy of growing as well. We're very, very interested in sustainability. We're like to say clean and green, so to speak, but we're also very interested in local food production and getting food to the local markets and encouraging people to grow their own food. So all those things, the Victory Garden business in Mays, Kansas, and the Victory Gardens concept, World War I and II, kind of go together, I like to think.
Yeah, one thing that I thought was really interesting about when I started thinking about doing this topic, and I looked into Victory Gardens just a little bit, one thing that I thought was really interesting was that they were also kind of a way to increase morale and,
absolutely,
and to sort of cheer people up in a difficult time.
Yeah,
right now, you're all stuck at home. Maybe do some gardening. You can eat and be happy.
Maybe we need Victory Gardens now more than ever. It's not only a great idea to grow food for your family and friends, neighbors, whatever, but like you say, the old-fashioned Victory Gardens were big morale boosters. Everybody had somebody in the service, and this was before the internet, and people certainly couldn't check in on each other. You might get a letter, once a month or whatever. You had no idea. There was a lot of anxiety. So, one of the things that I think is really important about gardening is you can, once you get people out with their hands in the dirt, there's a real connectivity there. There's, kind of a purpose, and it's very empowering, actually. And so these folks in the old days, they certainly felt that they were helping the war effort by producing their own food, while commercial food was being sent to, the men and women overseas and to our allies as well through the Lend-Lease programs. And so, yeah, it's a great concept. I don't know that people fully understand how big Victory Gardens were in World War II. There were as many as 20 million Victory Gardens throughout America. Mom and dads, neighborhoods, schools, and in 1945, Victory Gardens produced as much food, fruit and vegetables as any commercial operations, all the commercial operations in America did. So
wow.
Yeah.
Paul, let's get into a little bit about what people are interested in growing right now. What do you hear the most from people now, and has that changed before, since COVID-19, has it changed a lot, and what are people interested in when they come into your store?
Are you talking? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Paul first. If you'd like to jump in, Brian, absolutely.
No, that's fine.
Well, mostly they're looking at tomatoes. I mean, when people first time gardening, that's what they're most familiar with is tomatoes. So everybody, tomatoes. Then they see the rest of the plants, and then they get their curiosity up, and they wonder, how do these grow? I eat these too, but how do they grow? So, but mostly they asked about tomatoes. They consider tomatoes as an easy project for them to plant. But it's definitely more people interested in planting gardens this year. Last year, the year before that, I couldn't give away vegetable plants or sets of onions and stuff. I threw more in the trash than I planted or than I got people to purchase.
Do you think that tomatoes are a good starter vegetable for people to plant, or are they kind of trickier than people realize, or harder than other vegetables?
They can be trickier, but all of them got their own little niche and their own little tricks to growing them. But once you get used to it, and learn the secret of, bottom end rot and stuff like this, how to protect them and grow them, they're not that bad once you get past, a few diseases. And that's not, they don't occur all the time. It just depends on your condition. You learn when to water, how to water, and things like that, little tricks like that to grow a good tomato. And then once you learn the varieties that some are better than others, not necessarily taste, but growth habits, But it's pretty easy. The County Extension Agency helps us out a lot. They got a lot of brochures with a lot of information in them. And I usually try to keep a good supply of those to also train people how to grow. And one of the most, well, I don't know, it's really not a secret. I guess it is until they learn. When they first come in and the first time planting a garden, when they see all of these vegetables, they want to grow every vegetable there. And they want to overdo it. And when they overdo it, they get discouraged. If we have a wet season in the spring where the weeds take over and they can't keep up with it, then I'm not having a garden next year.
Well, so maybe the way to do it is for you and all your neighbors down the street to each pick a different vegetable, and then you share with each other or something.
Like a neighborhood garden. And
yeah.
I have 2 or 3 people that do that, and they come in and buy plants, and they have gardens in different neighborhoods on different blocks. And they do pretty well with it, but I get all the repercussion if the plants don't do well. You didn't tell me. You didn't tell me. What, did you read your brochure I gave you on the vegetables that you purchased on how to take care of them? Well, I didn't have time to do that.
Yeah. So Rebecca, how do you recommend people get started? Is it about the soil? Is it about finding the right spot? What's like step one for everybody?
Well, you do want to pick the right spot. There's a lot of different places that a new gardener can go wrong. And I definitely agree with Paul that one of the biggest mistakes people make is they go too big to start with and they can't handle it and the weeds take over and you get frustrated. And so don't go too crazy if you've never gardened before. But picking a good spot, vegetables want full sun, so find that good sunny spot. And then really, truly the next thing that I encourage folks to do is think about taking care of their soil, making sure that their soil is in good condition, adding compost, if they're going to do a raised bed, add some good quality soil and compost. If they're doing a container, start with the right potting mix. Don't just dig up, soil out of the ditch or something, because if your soil isn't healthy, your plants aren't going to be healthy. And so that's the next step beyond that.
You find a good sunny spot. And for me, that's going to be in the middle of my yard because the fence all around, there's shade at different parts of the day or from the house. Yes. Does that hinder other people? Because it's like in my head, I'm like, I'm going to put this in the middle of the yard. I don't know. It feels weird. I want it like off to the side, but I don't know. I'm going to get over it.
Yeah, there's definitely an aesthetic piece to that. But the more production you want, the more sun you want. So make it your focal point. Don't be afraid of it. Just go for it. Take that sunny spot and put your edibles right there. If you just can't do it, or you don't have a lot of sun, we want at least 6 hours of full sun. 6 hours of direct sunlight is kind of our minimum. So if you've got another spot that has at least 6 hours, you're okay. But also consider leafy greens, things like that. They're not as needy as far as sun goes. So, try some lettuces, kale, spinach, those sorts of things. Rather than jumping all the way straight to tomatoes or zucchini or things like that. You can start small. It's perfectly okay.
Okay. So it brings up a lot of questions. I know I want to get into container gardening versus just going straight into the earth and different ways. But can you elaborate a little bit on the soil and how you know whether or not you have good soil, or how to make it good soil? Like, first of all, how do you identify what you've got, and then figure out what it might need after that?
That's a whole hour-long conversation right there.
Oh gosh, we're gonna be
and
here
that's
a while,
just me, let alone getting Brian and Paul going on it. And so this is a great hands-on project if you've got some kids at home that need something to do. The best way to learn about your soil is to go dig some up and feel it. Dig some up and get it between your hands, rub it between your hands, make a ball with it, and see what it feels like. Does it feel sticky? Does it feel like a clay pot? Does it not form a ball and it falls apart like you're on a sandy beach? What does it feel like? If it's moist and it holds together and you start rubbing it between your fingers, does it stay in a ribbon or does it fall apart? That's going to tell you a lot about, do you have a heavy clay soil? Do you have a sandy soil? Something in between. Making mud pies is not just a child's game. It has a purpose. You can do that. And then the other thing that I enjoy and has some math in it, I've got kids at home, so I'm all about finding ways to incorporate other learning. Is if you take a scoop of your soil and you put it in a quart jar that has a good solid lid, fill it with water, and then you shake it up. So it's all mixed up, and then you set it down and you'll let it settle, and the sand settles to the bottom, and then the silt, and then the clay takes about 24 to 48 hours to settle out. And so that's going to help you see with your eyes how much sand and silt and clay is in your soil. Wow. And so if you're starting from ground zero, you have no idea what you're dealing with, that is a great way to help you learn about your soil and know what kind of problems might I have, because a sandy soil dries out really quickly, which is both good and bad. And a clay soil doesn't dry out very well, which is also good and bad. There's good and bad things, and you're gonna want to know that. When
do you want kind of like, let's say you do that little experiment, do you kind of want like equal parts of each of those four things?
No, actually, you want quite a bit less clay. You want 10 to 20% clay, 20 to 50% silt, and 50 or so percent sand. Ideally you'd have more sand, but this is Kansas, so unless you're right along the river, you don't get a whole lot of sand.
Interesting.
So that's if you just have no idea what you're dealing with. I like that as a hands-on thing to see what you're dealing with. And then we also recommend soil nutrient tests, to test your soil pH and your nutrient levels. It doesn't tell you everything you need to know, but it at least gets you off on the right foot, so you have some idea from a nutrient standpoint.
And I'll get off of soil here, but I just want to I want to go back to the mud pies real quickly. What you want to be able to do is to get that soil in your hands and for it to kind of hold together a bit. It'll kind of hold together.
Yeah, okay. You want a nice ball that'll crumble a little bit. In a perfect world.
Gotcha. For anyone who's just joined us, I'm Sarah Jane Crespo, and this is Digital Democracy on Tap. We have Brian Mann of Victory Gardens in Mays, Rebecca McMahon from the K-State Research and Extension Office, and Paul White of P&P Seed Company. Please join the conversation. We'll try to get to everyone's questions within the hour. And I do have some audience questions that I want to get to here. We had several come through right at the beginning. Larry says, I have 2 persistent garden pests, deer and slugs. Any suggestions beside fences and salt? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
He's got a lot of meat around the garden's all I got to say. He might come up with some new dishes. I have, in my store, I sell a product. It's a deer deterrent, and it depends on how big it is. You know, a nice deer fence works sometime with the deer deterrent that you could use around that to spray, you know, to keep the deer from getting in his garden. You know, he might have to screen it, you know, with some kind of screen. But like I said, put a fence around it. We had the same trouble with rabbits. It just depends on where you are. You know, they'll get in and this is their favorite time of the year. They're hatching out. They're running all over the place. They tear the broccoli, the Swiss chard, all of those leafy vegetables up this time of year. And you have trouble getting started. But as far as slugs, they have a product out. I don't know what it's called. I don't remember what it's called that would help those slugs and that, you know, that won't hurt the plants. But I don't know what it's called right now. I can't think of it.
Any other ideas for those pests?
You know, from a slug standpoint, one of the things that you want to think about is what's causing them to be there. And, you know, those slugs like moisture. And so one of the things that's a good best practice for any garden is make sure you've got good airflow, you know, make sure that you're not keeping things too wet, because that's going to reduce a lot of disease challenges. And, you know, your slugs need that moisture as well. So making sure your plants are spaced out, you've got good airflow, using cages and that sort of thing. In a wet year, it's not going to solve it, but you know, some of those basic cultural practices can go a long way. Doesn't help with the deer for sure, but the slugs it can help with. You know, deer are so persistent. You know, there's deterrence, fences. There's always failures. You know, I find I deal with rabbits myself, and I got to the point where I just put chicken wire fence around each of my separate plots of my garden to keep the rabbits out.
All right. Brian, you sell at the farmers markets, the Old Town Farmers Market in Wichita.
Right.
Is that correct?
We sell exclusively at the Old Town Farmers Market. Right.
What is happening with farmers markets right now? I'm just curious.
Well, I tell you, the Old Town Farmers Market is going to be opening this coming Saturday, or this Saturday, I guess it is, with you know, a lot of COVID restrictions and personal distancing and PPE and, you know, all the things that we've been hearing about. So that markets will be opening in the farmers market, or the Kansas Grown Farmers Market at 21st and Ridge. I think that opened a few weeks ago. I think this might be their 3rd week coming up, also with the same kind of restrictions going. And so, you know, the Old Town Market was delayed a few weeks. We were supposed to start, I think, in the middle of April, if I'm not mistaken. And that was pushed back a few weeks because of COVID. And a decision was made to, you know, just try to kind of ease into it with all the restrictions and see how things go. So.
Can people go to the farmers market and kind of get tips for their own gardens? Is that a thing?
Oh, sure. That's one of the things. That's one of the things that we really love about being at the farmers market. The Old Town Farmers Market is pretty relaxed. We love talking to people. We're usually not really in a big hurry, and so we also sell plants there, tomatoes and peppers, and I just love to talk to people about how to plant these things. And there's you know, it's just a fun time to talk about how to grow vegetables. And So we always have time to talk to folks. That's my jaws are tired usually at the end of the market. So come by and talk.
Paul, I'm curious if living sustainably is becoming more common and more of a common ideal for people in this area, and especially when it comes to providing your own food. What are you seeing with regards to just kind of that attitude about living sustainably and feeding yourself?
You were talking to me?
Yes.
I think it's going to become, I think the circle is coming back around. I think people are realizing the importance of food, supplying their own food, learning how to grow their own food. They're already talking nationally of a food shortage coming up. I think farmers markets and roadside vegetable markets are going to catch it this season. I hope a lot of my growers, and I patronize all of the local farmers that grow. I know a lot of them, and they supply a lot of the vegetables that I sell here at P&P. I sell a lot of vegetables during the growing seasons. So and I know all of them, and they grow, and I've been talking to them already. They're trying to gear up for what they think is coming, So it's a lot of people have been asking questions. I do a little Facebook show every Saturday morning from 9 o'clock till about 9:30 on Facebook. And I'm getting a lot of questions. A lot of folks chime in, and they want to know, how can I grow this? When do I start? And they're coming in the store already now. I've had several people in, first time growing, want to know the amount and all of this kind of things that we've been talking about earlier, the size and how many seeds do I need and all this. I want to grow, So I think it's really pumping it up. The virus, I mean, it's helping the circle become fuller quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And they get the kids out and trying. And I always encourage them to take the kid outdoors, take the child outdoors, and show the child how to do something. You'd be surprised, though, in the generation gap we got, how many people don't know how to grow.
That leads nicely
don't know how to survive.
Yeah, that segues really nicely into an audience question that we have from Megan. Given the expense to get started gardening and the time it takes to become skilled, can a home gardener hope to offset grocery costs? At what point does it start to pay you back?
Oh, yes. You know what I go to the grocery store for? At least my wife, I don't shop. You know what she go to the grocery store for? It's never to buy vegetables. It's always oil, flour, cornmeal, and maybe a couple of pieces of meat. She just told me this year, we don't really need to grow anything for our freezer. It is full. So my freezer is full. I bet you I could live out of my freezers for 2 years without ever having to buy a vegetable. And she's got it sectioned off. I guess I need to do a class on that, how to do a deep freezer. And she's got it sectioned off in spaces with pegboard. She used it and got square. One square is all, and you know how deep a chest freezer is. One square's got all cabbage in it in the freezer bags. Another's got all blackberries in it. Another one's got all peaches in it that I grow. Another one's got all, so you just go to the freezer and open the lid, and that's full of all the greens and all of this, all the way down to the bottom of that freezer. So my freezer is full, no matter what the growing season is. If I had one good prior before that, I got plenty of food right now. I probably could go, what we're doing now, stay at home for I don't know how long. Without
yeah,
have food to eat every day.
So Rebecca, what do you think? How long until it starts to kind of pay you back, so to speak?
Well, there are so many things that go into that. I am all for growing your own food, and I think it's so important and so valuable. But at the same time, I don't want to oversell it to a brand new gardener. One of the things is to really look at your inputs and figure out like where can you get some inputs that you don't have to spend money on. Do you still have leaves that haven't been raked up? Can you get some grass clippings that haven't been treated with herbicides that you can use to improve your soil and things like that? Buying and planting seeds directly rather than buying a lot of transplants. Tomatoes and peppers you have to buy at this point in the year, but direct putting seeds into the garden. There's things that you can do to spend not a whole lot of money, and one of the real things is, if you're not working, if you've been laid off and you're trying to save grocery money, think about it. You have time. You can spend time that you otherwise wouldn't have had to spend for better or for worse, unfortunately. And so you can do things that you maybe would have had to pay money for otherwise. You can, find those inputs and spend that time improving your soil and spend more time planting and weeding to get a good output. The other thing, though, that I challenge folks, when I teach about, planting a garden and getting started, is I really want you to think long and hard about, what do you actually like to eat? Don't plant something that you don't already know how to cook, that you don't like to eat, because then you're wasting your money and your time. And then also think long and hard about what you can buy from the grocery store that's inexpensive and what you can't, or keeping in mind your quality aspects. Usually you can buy potatoes and onions pretty inexpensively from the grocery store if you're really looking at cutting your grocery bill down. And so maybe you want to focus your garden space on things that are more expensive to purchase from the grocery store in order to balance those kinds of cost concerns. It doesn't always work out that way, but sometimes you have to be a little bit cynical about it, and really think about what's going to give you a good return. I love growing leafy greens because they're expensive in the grocery store and they're relatively quick and easy to grow, and so it's a good cost benefit, if you're really looking seriously at your grocery bill.
So Rebecca just mentioned, that maybe it's a little late to start on tomatoes or peppers. I have a question from Karen.
So from seed, you can still buy
seed.
plants. And yes.
Right. I'm sorry, that's what I meant. Karen on Facebook asked, what is good to plant right now? Brian, do you want to get into that a little bit?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is kind of a sweet spot, if you will, for growing in springtime. We kind of break down different, different plants you can grow and different vegetables you can grow in the garden into cool season plants and warm season plants. And the cool season plants are obviously the things you can put out when it's still pretty cool outside. We do some of our actual planting outdoors on St. Patrick's Day. So some of our stuff goes in the ground in March. You have to be careful what you put in there in March. But so now we're heading into May, which, basically, 2 standard deviations past our last frost date is May 1st. So at this point in time, we're probably not going to get a frost anytime soon. Hopefully Rebecca will agree with me on that. So after you get past about May 1, you're pretty safe with things like tomatoes and peppers. And like Rebecca was saying, you're going to probably want to put those out as plants. It's a little bit late to do that. So right now, like if you were to go to the farmer's market tomorrow, you would find spinach and you would find greens like kale. You would find leaf lettuce, and you would find, green onions. So those are the cool season vegetables. And those are things that, depending upon where you're growing and what you're growing, you can probably still get away with doing some of those things as well. We're still planting onions. We're still planting potatoes, and we do these in succession. We plant similar things every week up to a certain point in time. I just finished today planting about 50 tomatoes and pepper plants, and so we're kind of into that swing of things too. So this is a really fun time to be a gardener. I'm not sure you could really go wrong on too many things other than trying not to start your tomatoes and peppers from seed. It'd take a little while. Sarah Jane, can I throw in one other thing about the markets? Is it okay to do that?
Yeah, go ahead. Actually, I also had a little note in the chat about a farmer's market at the Wave that I didn't know about either.
So what I wanted to mention, we were talking about COVID and farmers markets, and again, it's obviously a confusing time, but the markets are going to be out there. And but because of COVID, there've been a couple of markets that were actually generated online, where people can go and shop for vegetables online. One of them is at Wave. It's called the Funky Farmers Market, I think, or something like that.
Funky Fresh.
Funky Fresh, thank you. And it's really kind of a neat operation. People can go there. They can see the products that are available. They make deliveries, or you can go down and pick it up again. So you don't have to necessarily go to a market to get those things. So that's kind of one thing that came out of COVID. Another thing is there's kind of a variation on the theme. Ha Ha Urban Farms, a relatively small farm in Bel Air, is also doing something like that, where you're having a number of different smaller farms come together to sell their products online as well, with a single day pickup in Bel Air, or I'm not sure if Heidi's planning on deliveries or not, but so you're seeing farmers selling through the internet now as well, to cut down on or to kind of maintain that social distancing and make it a little, for folks that feel uncomfortable with COVID.
Wow, what a cool idea. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those things I thought, gosh, why didn't I think of that? But,
I want to ask about like front yard gardens, because there's the American kind of attitude of your front yard is just a bunch of grass. And
don't get me started.
Well, I mean, and then there are other attitudes have kind of come into the scene here, of like less grass, xeriscaping, I think I've heard it called. Are there some vegetables or fruits that are beautiful and could like be sort of decorative for a little while in the front yard? I mean, is this something you've seen at all, people using their front yards?
You're asking the wrong people, because we all think vegetables are beautiful all the time.
That's right, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I'll throw some thoughts out there. I find most of like the leafy greens, there are so many colors and textures of lettuces and other leafy greens. They're awesome. There's no reason you shouldn't consider planting them in your flower bed. Even if you're in an HOA that has restrictions, there is no reason that you couldn't be putting some of those leafy vegetables into flower beds. Same thing with root vegetables. Carrot tops are awesome texture. Beet greens can be beautiful. Swiss chard is probably the most picturesque vegetable you can grow. So there's so many things that would work well in an ornamental capacity. Probably the one that's the hardest to sell are your tomatoes, because they do get pretty ugly as the summer goes along.
Are there some edible flowers that we should be eating after we grow them?
Yeah. A lot of the edible flowers are cool season, but things like nasturtiums, pansies, edible flowers, you want to be real cautious about things that have not been treated with any kind of pesticides grown in a traditional garden center standpoint. So you have to be a little more cautious for sure about edible flowers. But lots of fruiting plants are beautiful. I do not like to eat eggplant at all, but the plant itself is beautiful, and the flowers are beautiful, and the fruit's beautiful. So if you're an eggplant lover, there's so many options there. I'm sure Brian or Paul have other things that they like.
After you're done looking at your beautiful eggplants, I will take them.
Mustard greens are real pretty. You planted some in the spring, the heat's gonna bolt them, and they're gonna flower out. They do a stem up them, and they'll have pretty yellow flowers, small yellow flowers on them. But I always said, you can't. When people tell me I don't have any room, I say you can't eat those flowers in the flower bed. And like you was talking about the yard before, you can't eat that fescue grass in the yard. When you're trying to eat versus
reprioritize.
So, landscape garden in the middle of a yard, beautiful.
Interesting.
Sarah Jane, if you were to drive by my house today, we have 3 raised beds that are trellised and they have vegetables in them. We have a cool season bed that is literally right by the street as people walk by, and it has, beautiful different colored leaf lettuce in it, spinach and Swiss chard, like Rebecca was saying, absolutely beautiful plants.
Right.
And then further back, as the season warms up a little bit, we grow cantaloupe or some vining crops in there too. And the cantaloupe will actually vine right up the trellis, and when they're ready, they'll just kind of drop off and roll into my neighbor's yard. And so whatever rolls on that side, they get to keep. Whatever stays on my side, we get to keep. But it's actually kind of a lot of fun. It's kind of a focal point. Of course, we still have social distancing and things, but people will actually stop and ask questions about the garden, and it's kind of a focal point. So my yard is full of raised beds.
I have a couple more audience questions here. I have several more, but let me get to here. This one's for Rebecca. What in-depth soil tests can be done, including micronutrients, and how much does it cost?
So right now, because our office is close to the public and, for the safety of everyone, if you want a soil test through the K-State Soil Testing Lab, the directions are right on our website. You can go and print off the information sheet and the label to send them directly to the lab on campus. And the basic tests usually include soil pH, acidity or alkalinity, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and organic matter. That's kind of the basics. They do also offer a full complement of micronutrient tests and even some heavy metal testing, things like that, if you're particularly concerned about those. And so those are all available. Usually through our office, a basic test is going to run $20, which includes the test plus shipping and handling. Since you'd be sending them up directly yourself, you'll be paying the shipping directly out of pocket plus the lab fee costs, and those are all on the Soil Testing Lab website. So I will say, because of staffing and so on, those tests may take a little longer than you have time for right now. I still certainly encourage them. But even just to, pick up a test kit, normally I don't super recommend test kits, but even just to use a test kit to see generally where you're at is going to give you some place to start.
Another question here, this is really interesting. Do you have an estimate of how much product home gardeners in the Wichita area produce annually? Do we know at all what is being done?
Really,
just
no.
Pretty much no.
Well, that's really hard to track for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, one gauge of that, we've operated through our office Planter Oath for the Hungry for 20 years, where home gardeners can donate excess produce to the Kansas Food Bank, which incidentally we're not doing this year because of COVID. But many years we've got 20 to 50,000 pounds of produce donated from home gardeners, and that's just their extra that they're donating. So there's quite a bit of production out there from gardeners that are practiced at it.
So here's something that question kind of leads well into, is if communities manage to become wildly successful growing their own food, the dream comes true, could it have any negative impacts on the food supply chain or the economy? Could you see a negative impact from everyone just being really successful growing their own food?
I think it is all going to even out eventually, because if you're producing more of your own food, you're going to be, purchasing gardening supplies, canning supplies, things are just gonna shift around a little bit, and for sure, not everyone's gonna be producing their own. So, I do know, like some of our producers, like Brian, not him specifically, but said, well, if everyone's growing their own, who's gonna buy my products? And I think my response to that would be that once someone has developed a taste for homegrown vegetables, buying styrofoam tomatoes from the grocery store are not going to be so exciting anymore. So, I think short term, maybe, but long term, I think it'll all even out. And I really hope that it makes everyone more aware of the food supply chain and how fragile it is and how important it is to have farmers and resources, locally and regionally.
So Paul, we've been talking a lot about vegetables, and you mentioned the frozen blackberries in your freezer and all of that. What are some fruits that you recommend for first-time growers, and then herbs that would be good in Wichita for people to try out?
Fruits, man, the Wichita weather is very challenging when growing some fruits. I think I lost my peach trees this year because of the climate. They were bloomed out so pretty, and I have been keeping up with the sprays, the dormant oils, and all of that on them, spraying them, and all of a sudden we got a freeze, and I think it stayed cold long enough that night to hurt them. I don't see any fruit sitting on. All the blooms are gone, but even though I'm still spraying them, I don't see anything sitting on. Believe it or not, grapes are pretty easy to grow. I've been trying to kill some. I can't kill them. So grapes are,
that sounds like a great fruit for me to try. Yes.
Grapes are pretty hardy. They're pretty easy to grow.
Okay.
I lost some of my apple trees. We had a good year one year, and I babied them, and they fell over. Too much fruit. The root system was too shallow because I mulched them too soon.
Oh, wow.
Somebody's got an orchard and they like to mulch in to keep the weeds and all that out of it. Don't do it too soon. But I've got frozen peaches. If you get some peaches, they freeze real well in the freezer. Like I said, grapes are frozen for a short period.
Yeah. What about herbs? Are herbs easy? I feel like they're supposed to be easy.
Yeah, they are. Herbs are pretty easy to grow.
Do you want to grow them inside mostly, or do they go outside too?
I've got an herb garden outside with chives in it and Toronto and all of that. They grow pretty easy. They are harder to preserve unless you dry them. You know what I mean? To keep them the way you buy them out of the grocery store. They're all dried, most of them, unless you get them in the season where they got some fresh over in the vegetable department. But they're not that hard to grow. They're pretty easy to grow. I haven't had a lot of insects on them, to deal with, but they grow pretty easy. And you're talking about another nice flower, chives, pretty purple blooms on them. So that's a nice flower too. But they're pretty easy to grow.
Brian, what about being chemical free? Is it pretty doable? Do people seem to prioritize that for one thing? And if not, should they? Is it as important as some people say? Do chemical additions cause problems in the soil down the line? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think there are, kind of a lot of different levels of discussing that. I think if we're talking about, gardening in your backyard, or, raised bed garden or a container garden, there may be a very good chance you're not ever even going to come across that. You might have some relatively healthy plants, and especially if you're growing cool season things, it's, probably unlikely that you're going to need to do a lot with your turnips or your carrots or lettuce or spinach or anything like that. I think chemicals might come in more of a question later on with squash and tomatoes and things like that. My take, obviously, is at Victory Gardens, we don't do that. We don't use anything that's not OMRI approved. That's just a part of our philosophy. And so we think it's important. I've also been involved in developing gardens, children's gardens in Wichita. And in those gardens, they also do not use chemicals. So I'm just saying, I think it's possible to do it without actually, it might not be as big an issue for most people as they might think, quite honestly. Like Rebecca was saying, a lot of that just depends on your soil health. If you have really healthy soil and you do some really nice things, mulching, watching your plants, removing pests as they come along, it might not ever even be an issue. So I know I've dodged that question a little bit, but from a perspective as a grower, it's not something we do.
I see. So would it be like a smart path forward for someone who hasn't done a lot of gardening this year to maybe pick like 2 vegetables and maybe 2 herbs and maybe a fruit, and then to also focus on their soil health? Maybe just like, we have a handful of things we're going to do, and we're going to try to improve soil health this year, and then kind of grow from there.
I think that'd be a great plan, Sarah Jane. If we really promote small space gardens, and something that's 6 by 12. I mean, that's a nice sized garden. You can get a lot of produce out of that. You can do container gardens as well. Get yourself a 55-gallon plastic drum that's food grade, cut it right down the middle, build a little frame around it, and put your soil in there, and you make a very nice growing area. I think one of the things, if folks want to actually grow things, and I think like we've all been saying, you want to be successful. That's you want to plant something and you want to eat it. It's exciting to do it, exciting to see it grow, exciting to eat it. There are some foods that you can basically cut, eat, and they grow back. And that's the fun thing right there. So you don't have to have a huge space. These things like a leaf lettuce, things like spinach, kale. These are all things that you can cut and will come back again. A week later, you can go out and harvest some more. And you can do that repeatedly throughout the season until it gets too warm and the plant will bolt. It will basically go to seed. But you don't have to have, a 20-foot row. If you were to grow literally 6 feet of spinach and you were to pick it every week, you would have more spinach than you would know what to do with. I mean, a family of 5 probably couldn't eat that much spinach, to be real frank with you. Same thing with leaf lettuce. And so that's really cool, because I call that grazing gardening. You can kind of go out and you just graze what's there, and it grows back in a week. And so that's fun. And we were talking about cost. You can really, your bangs for buck, lettuce seed, spinach seed, they really don't cost much at all, but you're going to do a lot of eating out of that.
Awesome. We're starting to run out of time here, but you made me think about growing indoors.
Right.
I mean, how many, and I don't know who has done a lot with this, but who could talk about growing vegetables or fruits or whatever it is in your house? Is this a thing that is doable, or only if you have like the pot sitting there in the sunlight all day, or what would work inside vegetable wise?
Boy, Rebecca, can you answer that?
I can.
I don't.
Yeah.
I have a high tunnel, but that's not fair. That's different than growing inside.
That's definitely not fair. So I'd say yes and no. The challenge with any plant is that sunlight, and indoors you're just short on sunlight. Even trying to grow herbs in your windowsill can be a little challenging if you don't have additional light. They'll grow for a little while, but not for a long period of time. So if you're really doing indoor stuff, you're going to have to invest in some lights, and at some point that doesn't become very cost effective either. One of the things that I enjoy, and from a cost benefit standpoint, it's not necessarily super efficient, is growing some microgreens and things like that inside, especially during the winter under a little bit of light. Plant the seeds and let them grow just, so they're a couple inches tall, and then harvest them at that stage. I actually had some extra pea seeds, some old pea seeds, and I planted them in a tray and have them growing in the basement. And so I've been taking a pot of pea shoots and cutting them off and eating the pea shoots as
and they're under
addition.
What kind of a light?
Just a fluorescent tube light.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so my kids looked at me a little funny the first night we had pea shoots on the table. But then on Sunday when we were video chatting with my parents, my kids were out in the garden picking the leaves off the peas, and I was like, actually, I want you to leave those there. So that I think is also a very doable indoor project, but because it takes more seed, and it's not as sustainable financially or environmentally, but is a great way to get started and develop a taste for veggies.
I have a comment in the chat here that mushrooms are a piece of cake to grow indoors and also delicious. Can people go get mushrooms at your store? I mean, where do you go to like get yourself started doing mushrooms?
I don't know about that. We do buy mushrooms. I don't grow any mushrooms. I have a lot of people come in that hunts the wild ones and harvest them when it's time to harvest them. But you got to know what you're picking when you do that. But I haven't dealt that much with mushrooms.
Just I've never thought about.
There are places you can buy kits. I think for a home connoisseur, that's a place to start. You can buy kits where they have the substrate and they're already inoculated. The inoculation process can be a little tricky without the right facilities. And I do know there's a couple of local places, both growing fresh mushrooms locally and also that would sell kits and things like that. There's also online sources of kits. I haven't tried it for a number of years, and I was too busy to be a good humidity manager for my mushrooms. But
Rebecca, I know we're running out of time. There's so many things I want to ask, but will you mention a little bit about your classes that you have, the Victory Garden? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of a series of beginning gardening classes called Victory Garden 101. They are on Tuesday nights, so starting up here in less than an hour. For tonight's class, we're talking about tomatoes. So we've already covered preparing your garden site, garden planning, growing your own salad last week. Tonight's tomatoes. And then coming up, we've got vertical gardening with trellises and things like that, and then looking at weeds and insects and disease management and those sorts of things. So it's not too late. You can still sign up. It is free. You can sign up and join the remaining live classes if you like, or you can also get the recordings of the previous classes.
We have gone over, of course we started late, but there you have it. Are there any last tips that the three of you can give to folks who are new to this, or just a pro tip or two for the veteran gardeners out there?
Well, don't be afraid to jump in the water. You'll dry out.
Okay. I'm going to take that tip for sure. I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, I would really encourage people to, if they have any interest in growing small spaces, container gardens, raised bed gardens, give it a shot. Start with something simple like cool season vegetables. You can still do that right now, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you can, have kind of a mentor, have somebody that can kind of show you the ropes a little bit. And usually old gardeners, neighbors, people that have had gardens before are more than happy to do it. There's probably nothing more important than tapping into somebody like a Rebecca McMahon or Paul, or somebody that's done it before in that area.
Yeah, I would say just start somewhere, and also don't be hard on yourself. Paul alluded to this earlier. Kansas weather is rough, and a lot of things can go wrong, and you think it's your fault and you're a horrible gardener, and a lot of times it's not you, it's the Kansas weather. So don't be hard on yourself if it doesn't go right the first time around.
Okay. Rebecca, I also had a little Facebook question about where they go to sign up for the Victory Garden class.
You can go on to, probably the easiest way to get to it. There are Facebook events, so you could search for that. But also, if you go to sedgwick.ksu.edu onto our main webpage and scroll down, you'll see the events, and you can follow that link. It should get you there eventually. Websites are a little tricky sometimes.
All right. Well, that is all we have time for. Thank you so much, you guys, for joining our panel today. And to all of you, I hope you've enjoyed our program. Next, we'll be discussing the U.S. supply chain on Tuesday, May 12th, and that will be in partnership with the National Program 1A. So that's very exciting. And in the meantime, check out engageict.org for past videos, podcasts, and more. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo. Thanks for joining me for Digital Democracy on Tap, and good night.